is. Right? It's like Jesus on the cross. The thief steals, kills, and destroys. So who killed Jesus on the cross?
The thief.
The thief. Well, what does God do? He gives life. So who raised Jesus from the dead?
The Father.
The Father. You see how that reveals God?
Yeah.
You see how that draws a distinction?
Yeah.
So Jesus manifested how God will be with a sinner.
Mm-hmm.
And even today, 2,000 years later, the church says God's the one who did that to Jesus on the cross. The whole purpose of him coming into the earth was for judgment, so that we could see that God is never the one leaving or forsaking or condemning or punishing, but we could see that God is the Good Samaritan.
Yes.
And 2,000 years later, 99% of the churches are preaching the reason that Jesus died wasn't at the hands of the serpent or sin and death, it's because God couldn't stand to look upon sin.
Right.
But Jesus is God, and he was hanging out with sinners the whole time leading up to the cross.
That's right.
So how can we say God can't stand to look upon sin?
Right.
And we don't want to wrestle with the Scriptures. We don't want to wrestle with the tension in the Scriptures and see what the Scriptures are actually teaching.
Yeah.
And see that he's trying to separate the voice of the stranger. Who was the one telling Jesus he was forsaken? The Pharisees.
Yes.
Jesus just finished telling them, you are of your father the devil. So what were they trying to tell Jesus? They were tempting Jesus to believe God was ashamed of him because of his nakedness.
Right.
So that he would do the same thing the first Adam did, which was when he saw he was naked, to think that God had left him and he needed to clothe himself.
Right.
So the Pharisees come and say, look at you, where's your God now? If you're really the Son, prove it. Clothe yourself. Come down off the cross. What does Jesus do? He quotes Psalm 22.
Right.
When the Jewish people, Psalm 22, they don't think of a psalm as individual verses. They see it as a whole thought. So when Jesus quotes, my God, why have you forsaken me? It's a whole psalm there. If you keep reading in the psalm, it gets down to verse 24, and it says, God has not abhorred the affliction of the afflicted one. Neither has he hid his face from him, but he will hear him when he cries.
Yes.
If you go back to Psalm 16, it says that you will not suffer you will not suffer me to see corruption, neither will you leave my soul in Hades.
Right.
And my flesh rests in hope, in certainty of that. And so Jesus was subverting the idea that we were dying because God had forsaken us. We were the ones dying, and we thought God had forsaken us because of our sin. And so he entered into our darkness so that he could blow it up from the inside out and show us that God had never forsaken us. We had forsaken him.
Right.
Jesus took, whose affliction was he carrying? Ours. Who is he on the cross? Us. We think God had forsaken us. We think God had forsaken him. Now God comes and says, my anointed one. Comes and claims. And then we see, oh, wait a second. Oh, he never forsook me either. Abba.
Yes.
Then we find ourselves crying out to God.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like, man, it's so easy to trust God when you begin to start to see who he is. When you feel frustrated.
I just wanted to share, sorry for
No,